workshop is on standards-based grading, and I believe we have a few presenters for us. So, Ms. Everson, I believe, are you starting? Dr. Everson, please excuse me. Please excuse me. That is a faux pas on my part. I apologize. Dr. Everson.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to start by saying I have two fabulous educators here with us today. So we have many, many extraordinary educators and educational leaders. But Ruth Bartstead, our literacy specialist and special standards-based specialist, is here tonight. And Kim Novak, another extraordinaire teacher leader. She works at the Logan Middle School right now as a math teacher. She has such a wide range of talents, including leadership with standards-based. So before I even begin to share information tonight, I want to have them step up and just talk a little bit about our journey and how standards-based has been a benefit to you and to our classrooms. Which one of you would like to go first? Ruth has been leading our learning lab.
I'm Ruth Bartstead, and I apologize, I forgot my glasses, so I need these to see you, if you don't mind. Now I'm good. So I'll just be the cool speaker this evening. I have been a literacy specialist since I started in the district. Actually, I initially began as a Title I teacher in the middle schools. As a Title I teacher, my classroom had to look and feel different. Prior to La Crosse, had worked in 7 different districts and 5 different states. I was married to the military, so I had a lot of opportunity to move and to grow as an educator. When I arrived at La Crosse, I had to do something different. Why would they be sitting in my classroom if they could already be successful with the way we were doing teaching? Prior district was standards-based. And so I brought those practices into the classroom and was able to make a positive impact with students. And working with them, I had the problem of students asking not to be taken out of my classroom. That's a terrible thing to have, but most of the time with the title program, when they make growth, they go out, they go back to the classroom, and they would come down and beg to stay in. Can I just fail a couple tests so I can stay in your room? So standards-based, the best part about the whole idea of standards-based is it's an equity model that empowers the student. It gives the student the power for their learning. And that is something that just attracted me because of my work with a lot of at-risk students. Since then, I moved into literacy specialists, and I brought a lot of those practices in. I knew that as a literacy specialist at Lincoln Middle School, those students would be with me for 3 years. And the expectation was, let's get them up to grade level by the end of that 8th grade year. We were able to get most students that entered into our school in 6th grade by the end of first semester of 7th grade, they were out of the program. They were back to the regular classrooms, and they were at grade level for most part. So it became evident that Lincoln was closing, and it's like, wow, what do I need to do next? And I talked with Stacy, and I talked with some other leaders and admin and said, I would really like to be able to take my expertise and my experiences and start to impact teachers across the district and guide and support the shift to standards-based. So we formed a Learning Lab leader team. And that's a teacher leader in each of our secondary buildings, and I do supervise and work with those teachers directly. And I was able to get them up to Minneapolis this last spring to a Marzano conference. Specifically, Phil Warwick did the presentation on standards-based. And they left there so energized and excited that we've had summer meetings, and they want to do the district opening on August 27th to get their colleagues really excited about where we're going and where we're headed. So just to kind of give you a recap, standards-based is here. It's going to stay, and we're going to make it powerful to help our students grow. It's all about the students. Thanks.
I'm Kim Novak. I have taught for, going on 15 years. Started in HPL, and I'm the type of teacher that always asks the kids why. Why? And particularly when I would see them working on something in class, doing some sort of application, then we'd get to the test and they'd bomb it or whatever. And I'd be like, well, why? How come? What's going on? Oh, I just didn't really feel like it. Or I didn't want to show my work. Or, a lot of those processes where it was all about behavior and not about showing what they actually knew. And so kind of started shifting my practices in my teaching into more of that show me what you know. And as a math teacher, we know homework's important. However, we also know that time is a struggle too. And so teaching kids how to go from 6th grade up to high school and manage their time and look at what do I need to know and how do I know if I know it. And so it kind of started with those conversations of getting kids ready to learn and grow as students, not just the math content. Then the standards-based kind of started coming around, and I started dabbling in it a little bit while I was at Lincoln before we made the complete shift to that world. And I implemented in my classroom a lot of the practices that we talk about with students about practice versus performance, and what makes up your grade is what you can demonstrate to me, and it can look different in a lot of different ways. And so that's where I kind of started dabbling, and then when I heard our district was going standards-based and we could jump in, I jumped in probably with both feet and brought a couple colleagues with, and have actually been doing standards-based to some degree probably for 6 or 7 years before we even had the chance to put it into Canvas and Skyward and all of the different ways to communicate it out. And a lot of my students that have already done that have graduated. They're graduating top of the class. It's not hurting them. And in fact, kids will go back to say, what we talked about in your class really helped me moving forward. I knew to ask my teachers, what does it mean to look like this? And it was focused a lot more on what do I need to know and how do I know if I know it and how do I show to you that this is what it is. So in the classroom, we have a lot of conversations around, all right, what does proficient look like on this particular standard? And we talk about, here's the problem we just did in class. Is that proficient? Is that approaching? How come? What changes it to that different level? And we really get into those rich, deep conversations of the why and how and show me, as opposed to just, you got this problem wrong, but there's no analysis as to why. It's really into where was the mistake? Was it the same mistake that you did multiple times, or was it just a single blip where, in math, we all make silly mistakes. 3 + 2 sometimes is 5 and sometimes is 4, and depending on what you're doing can be 6. We all make those mistakes, especially in those high pressure settings, and really encouraging the kids to focus on the learning and what they're learning and not so much on if they make a mistake or not, because sometimes we see students not try and not apply themselves because they're concerned that if I do this, I'm going to fail, and I want it to be my choice, and so I'm just not even going to try, because then I have control over it. Whereas if it's a less risky, let's try. Maybe you're approaching, maybe you're not there yet, but it feels less risky, and you know that you can continue to make growth, and you know how to get to where you need to go. So been doing it for a while, but really what I've seen as an educator is just a lot of growth, and I see a lot of positivity from the kids in terms of knowing what they need to know. It's very clear to them. I need to get to this point. This is what I need to do to demonstrate. This is how I change my proficiency level. It's not about A, B, C's, and D's. They're all looking to reach proficiency, and that it just stays at that level for the kids.
Thank you so much. Extraordinary, right? Mm-hmm. So let's take this apart just a little bit. Standards-based, sometimes there are myths around this. First of all, it is something that has happened at our elementary schools for a number of years. It's not new, and we can probably move ahead. Next slide. Let me just talk a little bit about where we have been and where we are going. So, theory of change. We have used science implementation for the last several years to help guide our way through what is standards-based. We often correct ourselves because people will naturally say standards-based grading. This approach, this process, has so much more to do with the standards-based learning and the teaching component and maybe how we're measuring learning differently and much less about the grading. And there have been a number of myths, even for us, that we have had to kind of stomp out. It's not about numbers instead of letters, and in fact, our district has made a conscious decision to use letter grades. It involves somewhat of a conversion and a discussion about what proficiency looks like. You heard Kim talk about. But it is about taking apart the learning process and the teaching process to identify exactly what we want students to know and be able to do. Our district also continues to use GPA and class rank. We have conversations with our local and not so local post-secondary schools to make sure that our transcripts make sense to the post-secondary level. Sometimes there's a myth out there that this process somehow has made it more difficult for students to get into post-secondary schools. But that is not the case. We have students that'll enter post-secondary schools from homeschool settings, a variety of ways that a transcript might look. I can see you have some questions. Would it be okay if I continue and then because I might answer your question and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. Is that okay? Okay. So we continue to create GPAs and class rank. We still use those data points for high school students. Sometimes there's a myth around standards-based that somehow our practices have sort of lessened the rigor or that we've changed scholarly habits. And in fact, the truth of the matter is that we've probably increased rigor and increased some clarity. Sometimes people wonder about due dates because we talk about accepting learning when it arrives. You probably heard in school a lot more about being able to take retakes and redos. And some people are very concerned about that and whether or not we're teaching responsibility well enough. So hopefully by the end of tonight's presentation, maybe some of those questions will be answered for you. Okay, so the screen in front of you, we've used science implementation. The first year you see there with exploration as our first stage of the process actually began before that. I started in the district in 2017, and it was at that time I think I was asked kind of on the spur of the moment to give a presentation on standards-based. And a lot of the energy for where we are today came directly from teachers saying, well, why aren't we doing this then? So I think similar stories at some of our local post-secondary universities too. So last year I think we would consider ourselves finally at a full implementation stage, but we continue to grow. We continue to grow in understandings. And thank you to teacher leaders such as Kim and Ruth that we continue to do that. So where are we going? This was a slide we used at a recent standards-based tour. And I'm speaking directly from the secondary level now because, of course, elementary's been at this a lot longer than secondary. But last year, we really kind of took a look at what are our non-negotiables? What are the things that we've really agreed on? And continued to identify our priority standards and working on clarifying what does learning look like in the classroom. So here just gives you a glance. You can move ahead one more slide, Dan, as to where we're heading. Okay? So we always need to know where we're going. By the end of this next school year, we hope that teachers are feeling more and more comfortable with our technology, the tools that we're using to personify grades, and exactly what teaching in a standards-based classroom looks like. Okay, we can move ahead. Next slide. I think someone said it already, but standards-based, not new. It's also very popular in the Cooley region. It's a local, state, national movement that's been going on for over 30 years, and it is part of our strategic plan for equity. So it's about making sure that when we talk about high learning levels and the capacity for all students to learn, that we really mean that. This process is really about a laser focus on ensuring that all students feel a sense of belonging in our classroom and that all students have goals and that they feel a sense of their ability to succeed. Okay. Next slide. So think for a moment, why would we be making changes at all? Why would we evolve as practitioners in a classroom? If we look at, might be a little bit blurry, but so I took my dad for a number of cataract surgeries. I am fairly certain if the operating room looked like it does on the left, he would be a little nervous, as would I, about getting cataract surgery that may be outdated. Education is no different. There are things that we need to reimagine, unlearn, relearn, and do differently. So just for a moment, which operating room would you want to be in kind of equates to which classroom would you want to be in. You look like you really need to ask a question.
Yes, I'm sorry. This goes back to your original slide. How does standard-based grading create a more equitable classroom? Maybe that's another you have in a future slide as well.
Well, I think we're getting there.
Okay.
All right. So, point being, educators need to evolve too. Our classrooms should look different than they did 100 years ago. Okay, so what are our students telling us? So, if you have not read Generations by Jean Twenge, Dr. Jean Twenge, she talks a lot about the decade studies and how we have changed. I can't believe I've reached the age where I hear myself talking about kids today, right? And parents today. Well, we have changed. We have changed, and classrooms need to change with the times. So this book talks a little bit about those changes over the decades. So what is Gen Z telling us? Many of us that went to college were not trained and prepared to teach and monitor and measure learning in Gen Z students. And so what are these students telling us? Gen Z, very inclusive. They want inclusivity. They recognize justice when it occurs and when it is not occurring. Safety conscious. You can imagine why, the things that have happened in our public schools all over the country. Creative and innovative. And they expect us to be creative and innovative in the classroom. Not always liking the sit and get. Want to be hands-on in experiential learning. These students are also feeling socially isolated, so they enjoy social learning. Digitally literate, usually better than I am, often helping us to solve technology problems in the classroom, and yet emotionally insecure, which is another reason why standards-based can be equitable. And we'll talk about that, I think, as we get a little deeper going. So, lots of research since I was born in the late 60s. At one time, we would assume that a student at a very young age was whatever their IQ was in second grade, was probably going to stay their IQ for the rest of their lives. However, that's not true. We know so much more now about the psychology of human learning, and we know that the brain is more like plastic, or that learning is about exercising. That the more we work our brain, the more we are all capable of learning at high levels. So this really comes back to that question in our classrooms, in our professional learning communities, about do we truly believe that all students can learn at high levels? And if we do, we begin to knock down those barriers that have been in the way. So what is this standards-based process all about? I don't think anything on this diagram would surprise you. And I got this off the internet, so I didn't make this up, by the way. This is truly a process. And I'll just give you a minute to take it in. But when you get in that center, that's what might start to feel a little bit differently. When I went to grade school and high school, the teacher taught it. It was the expectation that I learned it. We took a test. I either did well on that test or I didn't, and the teacher would move on. What we have grown to know differently, and this gets to your equity question, I believe, is that we know learning is not a race. We know that students will learn at different paces, and that it is our job to distinguish between the students that are learning at a high pace and who are learning at a slower pace. And oh, by the way, the psychology of learning would say that just because I learned it fastest or the quickest doesn't mean that I am going to learn it for the longest, that is somehow entered into my recall. So we as teachers have begun to really focus on practices in the classroom. So there's a difference between being standards-based and having conscious practices in our classrooms that are more equitable. Really two different things. But we allow students to fix mistakes. We ask students to redo things. We give feedback. And we allow for retakes and redos, not because we are lessening the rigor or the expectation, but because our goal is learning. So if our goal is truly to learn, we wouldn't stop students in the middle of the race and say, time's up. Rather, we would continue to allow students to learn at the pace that they are comfortable with until they are able to demonstrate mastery. Okay, so that gets to kind of this collective purpose. What is standards-based all about? Next slide. So again, I said this already, but it's more about the learning. It's more about how we teach. It's more about our ethics of teaching and less about the grading. But there is a shift with grading as well. But this is about all students, not some students, but all students. Okay, next slide. I'll try to be really quick here. But there are lots of components to standards-based teaching. And part of it is making sure that our classrooms are not the lottery. I don't know about you, but I remember even in high school and college too, I knew which teachers to take, either because I wanted to learn at a high level or because maybe I wanted to get a good grade. We want to take that element of the lottery out of education. And so you might hear teachers talk more about common practices. We have two high schools, two ends of the building. We also have, or two ends of town. We also have a charter school. But our standards and what we expect students to be able to know and do should have some commonalities. What we're looking for in proficiency of learning should have commonality. Just because one teacher at the south side gives an easier test shouldn't increase a student's GPA as compared to the teacher on the north side who might be teaching more to the standards. It's a very abbreviated way of looking at this. Okay, next slide. So again, Ruth, I think you showed this in a training recently with teachers. We know that there is curriculum, there's resources, there's unit lesson plans, and that's what we intend to teach, but we don't always know if students know it. So we are also changing the way that we assess learning. Not every student is going to take a paper pencil test and be able to show us what they know. So our practices have shifted in that regard as well. We allow students to demonstrate learning in a variety of ways other than just a paper pencil test, and we use those assessments to gauge our own instructional strategies to be sure that what we've intended to teach is actually learned by the student. That's the goal. Okay, next slide. So what we've been doing really since about 2014 has been identifying standards. The state of Wisconsin, not unlike other states, has a lot of standards to choose from. And so in a way, the work up to this point has been to sort those drawers out. Each course has an identified number of standards, some based on what the state tells us. We don't make them up. I think that's the next slide. In fact, we can go there. Let's go to the next slide. This is what a state standards looks like. What our teachers have been doing for a number of years is sorting them out and deciding which standards are most important, what should be at the front of the drawer, and what are more complementary standards. By clarifying this and making it very clear to the students and to ourselves, we also clarify what learning should look like based on those standards. Am I getting this right? All right. Okay, we can keep going. So, laser focus again, being clear learning targets. Feedback becomes very, very important. I think I even heard that earlier tonight. When you think back of some of the examples, when you took our driver's test, right? You're giving immediate feedback. I was terrible at that because I was usually frozen next to my daughters in the car, but they needed that immediate feedback to do well. Swimming lessons, right? Coaching. We're there, we're talking people through what do we see, what do we need to know better in the moment, rather than a teacher teaching it in that traditional classroom. Hopefully you've listened, hopefully you've learned it and give a test. That's the old way. The new way is giving feedback regularly. That's why you'll see and hear students, teachers talking more about daily feedback or formative checks with students. Those Canvas classrooms, you might be hearing about that. And then fewer grades. Now, fewer grades doesn't mean less learning. It simply means we've given students more time, more feedback to improve that final grade. Lots and lots of books out there. Dr. Jimenez, I kind of look to you. I think a couple of those, am I wrong, Western may have used recently, and not sure, Trevor, maybe UWL as well?
I don't know about what they're doing in the
Okay.
classroom,
Yeah.
so.
Sometimes one of the myths can be, I've heard this most of my career working in middle schools and high schools, is, well, why are we doing this at the high school level? They're not doing this at the post-secondary level. And I believe that's begun to change.
That is correct.
So some of those books they're what we use. By the way, the green Ken O'Connor, a repair kit for grading, that might be 35 years old. So this is not new. Some of the books to the right, the repair kit for grading, the white one was his remodel. He even gave himself a redo. But many books out there about grading with integrity, grading for equity,
On your mark.
ungrading. Great question to many administrators are using today when they interview teachers for the job might be, how do you know if a student has learned? What if you couldn't grade them? What if it wasn't about the grade? What if it was about something else? What if it was about what we see, touch, feel, smell? That psychology of learning again. Great question for a teacher to be able to answer that. What if I couldn't get a grade? How would I know if you've learned? Many, many resources. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's a little bit about the why. Gave you already the driving test and swimming lessons, but think back to the ACT. If you took that in high school, you may have taken it more than once, twice. Right now, you can take it as many times as you want to get the score you need to move on to the next level. So just an example of an illustration of, that's a little bit of what has shifted in our classrooms today, is making sure that no matter how many times it might take a student to learn, that we've given them that opportunity and that we will accept learning when it arrives. So allowing a student to be able to redo an assignment or retake an assessment isn't about giving them the easy way out. It's a little more like this. So with my children, I would sometimes put a list of chores on the refrigerator. Maybe some of you have done this too. There'd be a list. Mackenzie, you do this. Madison, you do that. Hopefully I've taught them how. I know I come from a military family. There is a right way to make the bed and a wrong way, and a right way to clean the bathroom and a wrong way, and my mother let me know. Well, when I would get home after work, if my children had not done those chores on the refrigerator, it wasn't a 0, and oh, that's okay, we're just gonna move on, you failed today. It was more like, well, Mackenzie, why wasn't this done? And if she needed a little more instruction about how to clean the bathroom or how to do the dishes right, we would talk about that. Of course, Madison too. So point being, it's that way in the classroom today. Instead of simply giving a student a 0 and moving on, this is about talking to students, building relationships, figuring out where they're at and accepting that and helping them move to the next level with feedback, constant feedback, and formative checks along the way. Okay. Next, bike analogy. If you needed one more analogy, most of us have learned to ride a bike, right? Maybe not all of us well, but bike. So many educators use this as an example. Next slide. So when you think about our proficiency scale, and I did bring a few gifts with me tonight so I can give you our proficiency scale. These are the grades that you might see in Canvas if you are checking your child's progress. So if you think about the child, and I had one of them that would look at the bike, admire the bike, but not necessarily want to get on it. I mean, it was scary to her. I had another one that looked like they must have knew how to ride the bike before I ever bought one. But no evidence simply means that the student is not engaged with us. They're just not sure enough to engage with that learning, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to change that. How can we change that student's desire to get on the bike? The next example, an analogy here would be the student finally gets on, maybe they figure out how to steer, they might figure out how to use the brakes and the pedals, but they're not really moving yet. They're getting used to it, getting familiar. Okay, that's what that 1 would mean in the classroom. 2 might be the equivalent of someone holding on to the back. Remember that? and they're not going to let go until the student has, the new rider has their balance. Teaching and learning process looks a lot like that now. Proficient, it's just what you think, that you'd let go. You'd be able to let go, and that bike rider would be able to take a mile bike ride and be safe, come back for dinner. And then, of course, there's the 4 level, that block where we want to make sure that even the students that are learning at a fast pace, or maybe already know it in our classroom, they're the trick bikers, right? They're able to show us some tricks and teach us how to ride the bike. That's sort of the change in that feedback model that I'm talking about. Did I get that right? All right, next slide is just an example, and I have them with me tonight. Here's what the rubric looks like. Here's a little bit how those conversions might look in terms of the numbers to those letters, because our district has decided, let's keep using those letter grades. That's what makes sense to our families. But this is a little about what those blocks look like and how teachers have taken apart their unit lesson plans and decided upon these categories what learning looks like in a particular unit of instruction. Okay? So again, why should practices evolve? Next slide will show you. Next one. So, next one. It's a little blurry. That's the old-fashioned report card, right? Remember those? Now, sometimes teachers with our tech troubles lately, where we maybe can't always get our technology to do what we want it to do, have wanted to go back to that report card. But if you imagine for just a moment, when we were using grade books like that, Algebra 1, if I was Kim's student, I might see that I got a C, but I wouldn't know why. So 1972 Chevelle, right? I had one before I even knew they were cool. Pulled it into the driveway, and my dad said, "What the? Where'd that come from?" Well, within a week, it didn't run. And when you pop the hood open, there's a lot of things that could be wrong, right? A lot of things. So unless I check the belts and the hoses, and is it the carburetor, is it the fuel pump, I don't know until I really dig in. So this is where standards-based becomes very scientific. In our classrooms, we no longer just give a general C, A, or B, and expect a student or a family to figure out why. We take it apart. So where we've been growing and where we will get to is the actual standards-based grading, so that as a family, you'll know, what is it in this classroom? Which standard did we have a problem with, and which ones did we excel? Which not only helps our students, but imagine what that looks like in our schools when 2nd grade can inform 3rd grade teachers, and 3rd grade teachers can inform 4th grade, and I'm just starting with 2nd grade as an example. But imagine those transition years from 8th to 9th, when teachers no longer have to guess, which standards is it we're having trouble with? We know. And we can adjust our practices to support that student learning, okay? Okay, next slide. So people will say, well, what about the habits, Stacy? Many teachers will say to me, fine, I get it. I see why you think we should give retakes and redos. I get some of that. Well, what about the kids that don't come? What about the kids that misbehave? What about the kids who will just wait for me to offer them a retake? Well, there's a lot of science to that too. But we know that behaviors matter. We know that dispositions matter. So habits of mind are very important too, and that's an extremely important conversation to be having with parents and students. And no grade, by the way, should be a surprise, including when we are evaluating how a student is learning with their habits of mind. So here you would see that we are talking to students about whether or not they are consistently engaged in their work. If they're not, the shift from 100 years ago is we no longer blame the student when they're not engaged. We look at ourselves and we change what we're doing to make sure that students feel a sense of engagement. We also measure whether students are respectful. Now, there's a lot of things that goes on under that umbrella of respect, but we talk to students about that, being respectful learners and being respectful of the learning around them and being good citizens so that they themselves can learn. Those proverbial blinking lights in front of our classroom doors and our school doors about dreams can come true here. We want every student to feel that they have the capacity to make those dreams come true, and we don't want any student to be in the way of another student's dreams. And then, of course, the last one, I am consistently challenging myself. So, very best of the students that can be at that top of the learning scale. We need to challenge all students, whether they're struggling or whether they are not struggling. So look for habits of mind if you are a parent. We don't factor this into GPA, kind of for obvious reasons, because one of the big grading shifts here is to separate grading behaviors from grading the academic learning. That's a very important shift. Okay. So I think I'll skip this one just for time's sake, so you can go 2 ahead. This is not to be confused with tonight's earlier conversation with Fund 80, but if you were to look at what is it in the 21st century and beyond that we should be preparing students to do and be. These are just a list of what a portrait of a learner looks like. And this is something that we need to take to heart as educators, that we're looking at the whole child. Kind of dates back to what I was talking about with Gen Z. Portrait of a graduate. It's not just about the standards we're teaching, but also about those behaviors. Okay, last but not least, there is a how to how we do this. Next slide. PLC plus. So we have to talk, right? This is another shift in practice. Teachers are collaborating. We avoid collaborating. We make sure that we use the time that we have given to us in our structured day to talk about, next slide, 5 guiding questions. And the one in purple is sort of new. And it goes back to what you were asking about, Adam. When teachers are in their prep times and their PLC times, their professional collaborative times, these are the 5 questions that guide our thinking. And I won't go over them all, but it's about prioritizing our standards, making sure we know which students are learning and which ones aren't, taking measures to correct for that. And then that 4th guiding question, of course, ties to that trick biker, right? We have to have a challenge for even those students that arrive already knowing it. The answer isn't always to promote them to the next grade level, right? And the 5th guiding question will be a theme for us this year. Really heavy focus on who benefits. And that's about feeling a sense of belongingness in our classrooms. All students should benefit from our learning, and identifying who doesn't is going to be an important part of our work. Okay, one thing you also might be hearing about, next slide, we have tech troubles like anyone else. For a while, we tried to use Canvas, our learning management system, as our grade book. As of last year, we collectively made the decision that Canvas is just not going to be the right grade book for us, and we will be migrating back this year to Skyward, which will be very familiar to parents. It'll give you a different visual, hopefully a better visual. But we will continue to use Canvas as our learning management system. So you will see your students' progress, the assignments. No longer will you have to call the principal and say, can I come pick up that textbook? Things will be right available to you on those Canvas pages, but those final summative grades will show up in Skyward. And we think that will be an easier visual for you, okay? All right, we have ongoing professional development for our teachers. I know sometimes you might be hearing, next slide, teachers are not always learning at the same pace either. Some teachers have grasped this and moved very quickly. Other teachers are working on things, but we continue to work with each teacher where they're at to grow this philosophy, these shifts in practice. And next slide, we do our best and we'll continue to improve upon our family, parent, guardian engagement. Each school does this a little bit differently, but on each school's website should be a link for you to see what standards-based is, hopefully what it isn't, and also some information for how parents can log into Canvas pages and understand the Skyward gradebook. We are always open to families that have questions, okay? Last but not least, if you are, I think we are sharing this slideshow with you, there'll be a lot of resources there for you to take apart, including, we have used Ken O'Connor's 15 Fixes. It's a repair kit for grading. It's been our guide, but of course, this is very different than actual standards work. This could be done with or without the sorting of those standard drawers. Yes, Adam.
Okay, so I first want to say I'm grateful that we're kind of helping along the technology. That's a big problem with it during the implementation. My question is, what kind of oversight is there with the implementation of standard-based grading? Have you been receiving feedback from the teachers before? How is that being perceived, since we in the board have heard a lot about that too?
Okay, so I'm not sure if I heard part of that, but you're asking what feedback we've gotten from teachers?
What kind of oversight is there for standard-based grading?
Sure. So I might invite my colleagues to come up. We work with a group of teacher leaders sometimes to generate questions. Last year, I think we surveyed teachers a good 3 or 4 different times, and we use that data to help guide our professional development. We back up a slide or two. We use what teachers tell us to guide our professional development. Does that answer your question?
Well, the problem is that I don't exactly, and I'm hoping this changes again, or I'm kind of want to see this again when semester comes up, seeing if there is a change. But what I'm seeing right here is not what I saw from our last year when we did implement this. This is nothing like what was actually implemented. We had a very large struggle with it, and this is only 40% of teachers approved, at least the ones that we surveyed, or I surveyed, approved of standard-based grading too. And there were a lot of them that just were very frustrated. We got that too from the staff outreach, got a lot of emails about that too. I want to see if there's anything that's we're doing for oversight for this, since this is not what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing equity. I'm seeing just a watered down standard. It's not a standardized grading, it's a de-standardized grading. What exactly are we doing to fix these problems?
Well, I would imagine that there are a teacher or two that has struggled with the process. I think, as I mentioned, adults learn at different levels and at different paces also. We spend a fair amount of time listening to teachers and teachers' concerns and work with them. This isn't something that we're doing to teachers. As I mentioned, I think in 2017, when I did a talk with teachers, it meant much of the energy around these changes came directly from within our teacher group, teacher population.
Changes in standard-based learning or standard-based grading?
Say that again?
The changes you're talking about right now, are those changes in standard-based learning or standard-based grading?
I would say both. I would say both. So,
Because when I was the only board member at the linkage at one of the high schools last fall, and the teachers were, it was more than 1 or 2 teachers. It was a majority of the teachers at that high school that were extremely concerned with standards-based grading. And they all said, it could be a great system, it just hasn't been implemented well. We haven't been given the tools. When we ask for the tools, our principal is told that our staff are not capable of learning the tools. And that's their quote. It's not, I'm not saying it to be mean, but teachers there were saying, I love teaching, but because of this, I may quit because I don't even know how to serve my students and my parents. So this isn't like a little problem of a few people disagreeing. Standard-based learning, I'm no expert on this. This could be the greatest thing since sliced bread. The problem is how it's been implemented, because the teachers are really struggling, and the students, when we did linkages with students were really struggling. One of the things that we heard from pretty consistently from students is that there's how the works with there's some assignments that aren't required, which are helpful to learning that they're not doing, so they're missing out on that learning. So I think the implementation, I'm not here to say it's a bad idea, but I think there's pieces missing in the implementation, and that was what I was hoping I was gonna learn about today, and I don't know if that's what Adam's getting at. I don't wanna.
Kind of is, and I don't feel like we got to that at all.
I'm not here to say it's, I think
Right.
standard, from everything you're just describing, it sounds like a good thing. I think we've got really committed educators here that just are struggling with how to implement it properly. I don't know if it's the Canvas software. I suspect that probably added fuel to that fire, which sounds like you're working on. But I think there's other pieces that our teachers are struggling. I mean, they were really, they weren't whining, they were struggling.
sure. Well, of course. So you're talking about a linkage. Were all teachers from the high school at that meeting, or was it
It was
a
a-
section
They were all invited. It was whoever chose
to come?
to come.
Sure.
It wasn't a great turnout, as they said, because the teachers were losing confidence in the value of the linkages, but that wasn't a representation of the teachers there. They were very, very concerned, and there was a lot of teachers there. I mean, I don't know how many teachers are in that building, so I couldn't.
I'm just going to speak up a little bit because I've been in the trenches as a teacher for a very long time. So one thing to keep in mind is last year's when we shifted to the fact that I was able to get into this role, which made me available across all 4 buildings. And we also brought on the learning lab leaders so that there was a point guard in each of the buildings, and that the unity and communication across the 4 buildings would start to take place. And last year, we kind of jumped over. There's a lot of reasons why phases don't go in a sequence, because even when we attended the Marzano conference, he said, these are the 5 phases to go through implementation. Right now, just look at, mark off the things that your district's already done. And then he looked at us and said, I'm sure nobody went from left to right. Because that's not really how implementation happens. Things come on board, you have to make decisions. Some of our canvas was up for maybe being phased out. We might have to switch over. So we shifted gears to that grading piece, which would have normally been, let's move into the classroom and the teaching and the learning piece first. So there was a little bit of shift because of some things that were out of our control that brought our attention to it. The great news with that shift, though, was our learning lab leaders were really on the cutting edge of that, bringing this information back for us to do some problem solving. So we increased our meetings, and we had to back up after Christmas time on how we were going through the implementation, because yes, we heard the same message. This isn't being implemented in a way that we understand or can quickly make this shift. So we backed up and we started to get people to trainings. I have provided standard-based learning summer institute courses for any teacher in the district for the last 5 years. I get about 10 teachers. So some of this also is, where are those teachers that are wanting to know this or don't feel that they understand it in their learning process as well. I've had book studies across the school year for them to attend, and I go to the actual schools and meet with the teachers by departments. We have certain departments that are leap years ahead because they've taken advantage of all of those opportunities. We have other departments that don't like the idea of standard-based because we're all human, and they're basically saying, we're not going to do any of that because maybe this will just go away if we don't participate. And then we have the people in the middle that are just maybe a little confused and don't know which way to go. So implementation, as Marzano looked us all in the face, said, it's messy. It's a messy process. What has to happen is that you have to be listening and you have to make yourself available to hear that. So Stacy very quickly responded by doing the standard-based tours. And we went every single month, well, about every 2 or 3 months, to those buildings, to the faculty meetings. We did a quick presentation to recap so everybody heard the exact same message, and then we fielded questions. At the end of each of those meetings, I had surveys put together that the teachers held their phones up and they did electronic surveys. We got the feedback. We met again as a team, and we tried to create responses to that. What's that?
It tied with staff development, that then was.
Yes, it tied right into our staff developments, our PD days. There was always a section for this. So what we have to do is have the grace to know that, yes, there will always be teachers, sometimes they're the loudest ones in the group, that want to disrupt, but that doesn't mean they speak for everybody.
They were very
And we have
clear
a lot
about
of
saying-
staff
No,
that are
no.
already moving past this, so.
The teachers spoke with me, were very clear to say, this could be a really good thing. We just
Yeah.
didn't have the tools to do it.
So,
So please don't whitewash
We
the
spent
teachers
this
that I
summer
spoke to.
It's not just the
building,
departments.
Hold on.
too
Let's
bad,
allow the
we
speaker
should
to
put the
finish.
phases in there. We sat this summer and we built an actual phasing, and I shared that out with the content coordinators just on Monday, because who should be trying to lead this as well are content coordinators. So I think we're moving into this year with a very solid plan, and what I received from 3 content coordinators at the end of my presentation, which we didn't hear last year, but I heard this year was, oh, I wish I had seen this last year. Now I know where we're going. I know what we're doing. So we have to respond, and you're correct. That's exactly what they said, and we built those structures in place. I would love to know if that's going to happen again this year, because that's what I'm diligently trying to get ahead of, is making this transparent. The whole thing about standards-based is the transparency. It has to be transparent.
One thing I would add, and that's, thank you for that, you shared excellent information. One thing I would add is the experts that we've relied on for professional development would say that, and this is true with science implementation, depending on what process you might be changing. Change is difficult for adults and for students, but adults, we may even be more challenging. But the experts would say it can take up to 5 to 7 years for teachers to feel a sense of fidelity, and a sense of integrity around this type of a change, because it is a big shift. It's not something that we've grown up with. It's not natural to us to make some of these changes. And so I would say, if we would, dating back to 2016, 17, when we were really identifying standards, if we dated that date as our first year, we still have a ways to go before all teachers are going to feel a sense of security and confidence with this. On slide 9, for example, that blue, green, yellow process of what standards-based, we as adults are going to need to do this. This is exactly what the adults will need to do to make this change process happen. So we'll analyze and fix our mistakes. We'll start over and redo. But meanwhile, we really believe that we're targeting that learning in a much more effective and
Very
equitable
good.
way.
Mr.
Jim?
Bagneski.
Number one, just a comment whole thing here. Marzano's still alive.
He is, I know.
He's been around
For a
forever.
long time.
The biggest complaint that I heard, and I agree with, after reading these, there's still a question mark as far as not grading homework. And the implications of that, then I don't perform well on a test because I didn't. It's supposed to be a given that if I did my assignment, I'd do well on a test. But sometimes for kids
Yeah.
and maybe even for adults, that connection isn't always made.
It's a great question. I bet Kim has some good answers.
I
But
have lots of answers.
homework
that
has
I would-
changed.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think it also goes to what type of question were they asked? As we look at our standards and the upper ends of what we're asking them to do, the application, they need to be able to practice that. And when we look at specific skills, we now have phones that, we assign homework, the kids take it home. They can take a picture of my math assignment and they're gonna write it out. It'll even show them step by step what they should write down. So did they really understand it, or did they just use AI to figure out what the answer was?
No. I get that, but at the same time, I think if a kid, let's say, tried to do his homework and didn't take the picture, because I would hope that's still an exception to the rule, but I don't know for sure. If that was then handed in and I saw that the student made a mistake here or there, you could indicate that the student wasn't understanding that homework assignment. But right now, I heard that, and even some of these books that I was fortunate enough to get do question as far as what we should do with homework. Should we or should we not?
I think the shift is it a grade that contributes to the ABC component, or is it to their learning? And so kids are still getting assigned homework, still getting assigned practice on a regular basis. They're still getting that feedback. And the difference is instead of putting it in that they got 25 out of 30 on their homework where it counts towards their grade, it's marked as they did the homework. They still get the feedback where I note, you know, what the skill was that they struggled with or where the mistake was. So they still get that feedback, but it allows kids to make the mistakes too. So
Oh, yeah.
then it encourages them to try.
That is still not what we're seeing even with standard-based grading implementation. Last year, when trying to do this, you were still graded for your formatives for doing your simple daily work. Even if you got all of them wrong, you still got graded as 100% for turning in the work. It's incentivizing students to work and be able to take that learning curve. What we're seeing now is that students are not even doing their homework at all. They're not preparing, and this has created a culture of laziness with our students too, where a quote from one of the teachers here, some students have said that they don't need to do work because everyone will pass. This is kind of watering down the grade. And we also had a student write down too where it's developing a subpar work ethic. It's not really focusing on the learning, it's still focusing on the test. The same student says it puts too much pressure on students during the test. And they still have to do their, it doesn't translate well to standardized 100-point scale and makes more work for already underpaid teachers. And another problem I had about this too. We are not focusing on learning when we're avoiding the homework or the daily work too. What we're finding is that the teachers have, pour this down here too. Let me look through this real quick. It should reward effort, but they don't do it, so the bar is cut. Learning should come first, grading should not. Gut shot kids don't know what what their grade is. This is not coming from me, it's coming from the teachers we've heard as well too, the same teachers that are very loudly coming to us too, where it's not just a couple, it's a lot of them. There's just not an implementation. It's not exactly focused on learning. It's watering down the system. It's not a standardized grading, it's a de-standardized grade. So what kind of oversight are we doing? What kind of oversight are we going to be seeing this year that's...
Adam, when was your survey done?
That was done in January,
Okay.
which albeit was done in January too, but we still heard a lot of complaints from the teachers during June. We still got an email from a student over on the end of May. This is something that a lot of people are worried about too, and this is also something where we're talking about transparency. There is no transparency with it. The parents don't even know what their children's grades are until the end of semester or the end of quarter. You don't know what your grade is. You don't know how well you're doing until the end of the quarter where you're given a snapshot, but it's not your final grade. And it's not until the end of semester in which students even know what they're doing for a class or how well they're doing as well.
I know exactly how my daughter is doing in her class in terms of being able to do the things that she's supposed to be doing.
So, Mr. Albert?
All right. So I think we're getting this confused with like, this process is great, right? But I have 2 high school students and I don't think it's high school orientated. And the reason is where he's coming from, because he just came from high school, right? Grade school, middle school, you're trying to get those kids to that next level. The problem is there's no next level after high school. And we're preparing them for the real world or high school. And I kind of agree with them that they're getting lazy. I have a daughter who is very, very intelligent and will take advantage of the system, right? She'll, whatever homework, great test taker. And then I have a son who he's a procrastinator, completely like myself. But he is getting left behind also because when it's time to take the finals and he's passing, and I'm not even completely sure what passing means until we get the grade, he doesn't have to take a final, which I don't understand. I don't understand why everybody's not, held to that level of like wanting to succeed to the, more than what they actually are. So I agree with him in the high school level. I don't agree necessarily on the whole system itself because I do think it's great for grade school and middle school. I just have questions and some concerns at the high school level. And I think, the linkages that we just had with the teachers, they were all high school teachers, I'll tell you that. And they were all very negative about the process. I also understand that there's the people that want to come and speak are going to come and speak, and the ones that are fine with the process aren't going to come and speak. So I get that too. But the biggest thing that stood out for me is that the majority, and probably all of them, said that we are not preparing our kids for the next step. And that I have a problem with that. Like, those are the people that are teaching our high school students, and they don't believe that we're getting them there, so.
So Dr. Engel, you wanted to jump in, or, okay.
So, again, I'll summarize this up. I think it's a great learning process, I do. I just don't think it's a high school process.
Couple things I could add. If I'm not mistaken, I think all of the schools in the Cooley region, high schools included, have made these adjustments, or in the process of making these adjustments. Our CISA 4 is offering professional development on a regular basis, not only for elementary and middle, but for high school too. So many of these practices are in motion. It's not just the school district of La Crosse that has made these changes from a traditional classroom to what I'm describing. And a couple of suggestions I would have, tonight we're trying to encapsulate probably 7 years worth of research, right? There's a lot to this that's going to take time to make a change from a traditional classroom setting, a traditional report card, to what I'm describing. But if you're interested, in another work world, in a smaller school district, board members came with me to, say, a professional conference, and we learned together. That might not be out of the question, especially if we went to something local. I brought with just a couple of examples of some of the books that we are using. Some are reading them on Audible, having them read to them. Other people are learning by reading them themselves. But it's hard to argue with grading with integrity, taking this whole book in and not saying that it would apply to high school as well. It's challenging for different reasons at each level. And again, teachers are going to be in different places in this motion of learning. Not every classroom is going to be able to explain this or do this in the same way. And it may take us another year or two to make sure that every teacher can articulate these changes well to a student, to a family. But I'm a firm believer that, and go back to what that operating room might have looked like in the 50s as compared to what it looks like now, that's what's happening in our classrooms.
I certainly understand the fear and concern, especially as we navigate this change and how it plays out in the daily experience for a teacher and for students. Every district I've been a part of has transitioned to standards-based grading. Adams Friendship, Rosholt, Auburndale, Gaelic-Trumpo, La Crosse. Many of them a decade ahead of where we're at right now. And every school has different experiences, but plenty of the schools I've been a part of have been sending kids to Ivy League schools and UW-Madison and UW-Stevens Point, and sending kids to the trades and having great jobs. It still yields high-quality education and learning. There are some questions about motivation as it relates to homework, no doubt. When I was using standards-based grading as a teacher, I tracked every single homework assignment. I made sure to follow up on it. Parents asked me a lot more about the homework than they did about their test scores, which was always a little frustrating, But there was still accountability for that homework, and that can still be built in. Those habits of mind or work habits or whatever you might want to call those, I provided a grade back to parents for that, and that was what most people wanted. Is my kid working hard? Are they engaged? Are they respectful? They were also worried about academics, of course, but I was able to provide specific evidence there then. They weren't engaged. They didn't turn in their homework, and here's how many assignments they're missing, and if they turn this in, maybe they'll do better on their test. So a lot more specific feedback, but I totally get those concerns as we navigate these changes, and what you've heard or experienced as a parent might not be the ideal that we're talking about here tonight, but maybe filtered through a potentially frustrating experience for a teacher from time to time. And those anecdotes are certainly important, but I think Ms. Bardzeth illustrated how responsive we are to teachers and how much change has happened since you did your survey, Mr. Manka, since you heard those linkages, Ms. Sukla. There's a lot that has happened in 6 months. Summer Institute on top of that. I am really looking forward to the next survey that you see, Mr. Manka, to the next linkage that you attend, because I firmly believe that sentiment will have changed.
If I could say one more thing. I mean, there was some teachers there that said, different departments were a lot more advanced than the other ones. So, I mean, I know it's happening. It's just, and I understand everybody needs to get on board. I mean, it's part of that. But, It is, and then, you know, the kids that are in there now, it's kind of unfortunate that they're the ones having to go through it, right? Especially these kids, the ones that dealt with COVID and, you know, had half of their middle school experience, so, it's just, I mean, it's, you're just worried about it, I guess.
Totally.
Mr. Beckman?
Change is always a challenge.
Could we see a report card as it printed out at the different levels that might be worth our time to say, when parents say they don't know what their kid's getting or whatever, we can look at those report cards and that might help lend some insight into the process.
What I can leave you with, I brought 4 things. One is, you know, I only mentioned a couple, but a couple examples. How many of you ever had a teacher that said, if you bring in Kleenex boxes, I'll give you extra credit points? You ever had a teacher say, hey, if you clean off my marker board, I'll give you some extra points? It has nothing to do with learning, correct? Doesn't have anything to do with standards. So many of the changes that we've made, along with sorting out what is a priority standard, and what is it we exactly want students to know and be able to do, is also the elimination of some very unfair, unequitable grading practices. I think I did that. I remember when my daughter said, please buy me 10 boxes of Kleenex, and I had to ask why. I think I might have even been the principal of that school. No, Kleenex has nothing to do with what I expect my child to know and be able to do in that classroom. So while some of the technical challenges have been more in depth and more troubling, there are some really basic things that we have decided to transform in our classroom. So I'll leave you with just a pager of Ken O'Connor's 15 Fixes. It's been around for 40 years, has very little to do with the standards. And then I also brought with just a printout of what the report card looks like, so that you can eventually see how our report cards are going to be able to inform you, the student, and the family exactly what standards were mastered at a proficient level as compared to standards where a student might still be struggling. Would be much more informative to know if it was my fuel pump or my carburetor is the reason why my car couldn't start, right?
I think there was a concern about kind of continual feedback, you know, with a point system or a percentage system as teachers are entering that stuff in. As a parent, you can see it on Skyward and track that like on a daily basis. That is, if they were timely. It wasn't the case. So it's not much different than it is now in terms of feedback.
And those are the things why we just keep recircling with teachers too, to make sure that that is something that we're improving and correcting as we go.
And my expectation would be that any parent could call their teacher at any time and ask, like, how's my kid doing? Where do you think they're at? And they should be able to give an estimate of that at any time.
Right.
I know there's been a lot of harsh words shared at the table tonight. And my kids' experience have been very similar to what Adam and Tim have experienced as well with theirs. But I also want to point, and I think Tim was getting to this too, I think what we're going for here is worth the journey. And I believe that you and your team are capable of executing it. There's just a really tough transition that we're going through that's been incredibly frustrating for students, staff, and parents. And I think that's what's kind of being shared at the board table tonight. But I think it's clear that this is where we need to be with education, and that there's going to be some tough years before we completely get to 100% positive or the number 4.
Advance.
But I appreciate the presentation tonight.
Yeah, and if I could, you know, before this, if you were teaching algebra or geometry, whatever, if your student came home with a C, why did they get a C? Why wasn't it a D or a B? And you didn't really know, where now it specifically says the student didn't know how to graph a linear equation. I mean, that is what you didn't get across. And now the parent and the student hopefully knows why they fell down in that particular area. And so they should go back and learn how to do that particular concept.
I'm gonna go this way around the table for comments, so I've not said anything yet, so I'd like to jump in here. I think, you know, at Western, we have gone through some of this conversation, and I think you brought up a good point, Dr. Everson. So a student doesn't turn in an assignment, gets graded as a 0. Does that mean the student didn't know any of the concepts that were listed on that work? No, it just means they didn't turn it in, but yet their grade suffered. So is the grade that we have been used to for, as one student emailed me, 187 years, is that really a measure of true learning if those are the things that are taken into account in the grade that we've known forever? Right, so I think those are things that we're trying to get away from under standards-based, is that we are actually looking at the competencies of the course and looking at what do we expect students to learn at the end and being able to show a measure of what that is and separate out what you are calling habits of mind. At Western, we call them success abilities, right? So that we could still measure the expectations of, timeliness, of, what we call those soft skills. So I think there is a purpose at the secondary level. At the post-secondary level, I think the most interesting transcript I ever had to review as an employer was one from a standards-based institution that was 27 pages long. And that transcript showed every course with at least 1 or 2 page write-up of the instructor plus a 1 or 2 page write-up of the student, explaining what they learned, how they learned it, what was still expected, what was still missing, and how they're going to achieve. I mean, talk about knowing your students. So I think there's some really good things. I think you said it best, Ms. Berkedal, that the journey is worth it. But there are some implementation dips, and I think we're still trying to struggle through those. So I appreciate the presentation. I think, again, it's definitely worth the journey, so I appreciate the work. So, yes.
Yeah, I was very glad that we had this topic. I've been looking forward to this topic, learning a little bit more about it, but also expecting to hear about and acknowledging there have been challenges and what are being done about the challenges. I'm a little frustrated that the conversation, those of us who brought up the concerns that we've heard, I don't go out looking for problems on standard-based grading because I don't even know enough about it to have a good conversation. I'm just reporting on what's been told to me, and I'm struggling because Good to Great talks about you have to acknowledge the problems too. You have to pick up the rocks and look at the squigglies underneath, and I'm a little disappointed that that was not part of the conversation until some of us brought it up and kind of reviewed in a harsh light. I don't know how we get the PowerPoint. I asked at the last workshop that we get PowerPoints in advance, so I don't know how we get the PowerPoint. I think it's important we all get that. I hope when you have an important conversation like this, again, we don't start at 9 o'clock and go till 10:30, because I feel like everybody's rushed right now on time, and I'm just taking up more of it, so.
I have a couple quick questions. So with opportunities like Direct Admit Wisconsin and the UW system and everything, so we'll have to continue providing on, at least on the final transcript, both class rank and GPA,
Yes.
if we want to participate in that, which it's an opportunity for our students and a good one, although UWL is not a participating campus.
Right.
So that's something that will remain consistent, right? I'm curious if, so we're following our state standards, right? Kind of across the board. And are our state standards benchmarked nationally in any way?
Some are. There's a lot of comparisons between, like, for example, science, national NGSS standards. Each content area is slightly different. But for the most part, what you're going to see is very, very common standards among our states.
So is there a way then as a parent to be able to see where is my child in relation to their local peers or to other districts across the country?
Well, a lot of the standardized testing is built that way.
Right.
So if what we strive for is that our content, especially at the high school level, is aligned with the ACT. We use an ACT suite to make sure that we understand what students know at certain points in their high school career, and we make sure that our curriculum is aligned in time to do well on such an assessment, because it's a stepping stone into a student's pathway to their career.
Is there any conversation about changing the use of the ACT as the benchmark, given how many higher education institutions are going test optional or test blind?
Right. We watch that, and we make adjustments as fit for students to be the most versatile in what they're going to qualify for as they graduate from our high school.
Every student Succeed Acts requires 11th grade testing, and so the state's choice for 11th grade testing is the ACT.
Right.
I just wanted to make a comment. I think you guys all did a great job, and just as a new person kind of observing, a lot of what I've heard was great questions by the board, and you're getting great questions to you, but those questions aren't getting directed back to the people that really can help answer some of those. So I would encourage you guys too, when you're hearing some of this stuff from all the communities, from whatever you're attending, please send them back to us, because, I mean, we want to know these questions. We want to give you the answers as well, but if we don't know them and it gets surfaced at a board meeting 6 months after the fact, it's really difficult. So, I mean, we can provide a bunch of information, but I think it's really important for you to also send them right back to us.
But the
so we can surface
linkages are
that.
notes that we don't, I asked if we could discuss them at a meeting. I was told last year we don't. They're notes that the board gets, that staff should all get, so those are all available.
Yep. And I was under the understanding that you guys had conversations with parents and with other people. So that was just,
Yeah, linkage
just
is
my,
right.
yep, my observation would be just that, yep.
Thank you.
I want to thank you three for coming over here. I'm going to be tough on standardized grading because this is something I think that is very important, especially for the students that are struggling, the parents that are struggling with this, and the teachers that were struggling too. I'm hoping that we can have a workshop again where I can see perhaps just more of an understanding, or we're more growing with standardized grading. But this is something that I definitely want to see oversight for, and making sure that we're in the right direction, make sure that people are indeed being heard, since that's not what happened last year. It's not what I saw happening last year's session as well. I'd be more than interested in attending one of these sessions or hearing more about exactly what is going on for this year. But my biggest focus is focusing on the oversight and making sure that we're accountable, that we're serving the people, and that personally we're able to respect our schools, or able to have the highest standard for them. And I doubted that it was standardized grading, and mind you, I'm harsh. I dearly hope that we're able to move forward with standardized grading. It's just we need to make sure that our students are able to learn, that they're putting in the effort, that they're able to go to school with the confidence that they're going to be able to learn, that the confidence they're able to go up to their higher educational goals. I want to be able to see that the teachers are not feeling like they're being neglected through this. I want to make sure that the teachers feel like they can come into work and are confident that they can work. There should not be 2 to 3 times the amount of time spent on grading for there still to be questions about what exactly a student's grade is. And the parents especially, the parents deserve to know how their kids are doing, and they shouldn't have to be going through asking so many questions. They should be able to have report them at all times how their kids are performing in our schools. And this is something that might work during elementary schools, but it's something that needs a lot of work during the high schools, which is what I'm hoping and seeing. And I'm hoping that we're able to have another workshop on this by the end of this year's semester, see how exactly things are changing with it, make sure that we are able to keep that oversight, and we are keeping accountability towards the school board and to our district as well with this.
Certainly. Phase
But-
2 on its way.
But thank you all thank you three so much for being able over here and being able to take some of the questions here too. God bless you.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are, we can tell that you guys are working in the right direction. It was just more voicing my opinion about, the current status of what it is, but I know it's changing. I have friends that are, elementary and middle school teachers, and they love it. So, my open mind is still there. I just know at the high school level, there are some people that are still struggling with it, so thank you for doing what you do.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, and again, thank you for the presentation. I think this is a great example of what we're going through, right? The implementation and ensuring that we are keeping high standards in this district, which I know all of you are committed to as well. So thank you very much for the presentation, and we stand adjourned on the workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you.